So we are on in Perkie Avos on in the second parak in the third Mishnah, and the Mishnah says, "Havi zihirin barashus." Be careful with the government. Russians is an archaic word. It's an interesting use of the word. We'll talk about it shortly. Why the Mishnah chooses to use this word? Why? They only they only befriend the person for their own purposes. Nirim ka'ovim b'shas hanasam. They seem to be like good friends when they need you, right? But they omdim lo la'adam b'shas dalcho. But they do not stand by a person when the person's in trouble. Now, this is an interesting statement because the one who said this was Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Gamliel. This is the same Rabbi Gamliel we had in the previous Mishnah, and Rabbi Gamliel was very involved with the government. He was the son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and he was the Nasi himself, and he was very involved with the government. And yet he still pointed out, don't consider yourself to be special because you're friends with the government. Don't look at that as a real friendship, because the government is only interested in befriending you. The king and the government, president, Congress, senators are interested in befriending you for their own purposes. They want to get your vote. But afterwards, if you need them for something, forget about it. And we don't have to belabor the point what's going on in New York right now with Cuomo and de Blasio. De Blasio came, when he was running for president, came to the Hasidic rabbis and begged them, please, I'm going to be bumped out of the presidential primaries because I don't have enough people who have donated. Ask your followers to please donate a little bit of money for us and for me. And they did. They donated for him. They kept him in the presidential primaries. And you see what happened when it came to the COVID pandemic. There was a funeral of a certain Hasidic rabbi. People attended. It was actually done legally according to the police guidelines, but things got a little bit out of hand, and de Blasio said, "This is the last time I'm warning the Jewish community," as if a few people who got a little bit out of hand are indicative of the entire Jewish community. He, of course, brought anti-Semitism with his statement to Jews all over the world, and he did not protest against the Black Lives Matter protests that were close together, didn't wear masks, and there were many, many more of them than there were people at that funeral. And when he was asked about it, he said, "This is apples and oranges. This is a national protest. This is just a funeral," belittling the Jewish people's connection to our giants who pass away, how much honor we want to give them during their funeral. Nothing, didn't care about that. It was important for him at the time to befriend the Jewish people, but afterwards, when he didn't need us, he's term limited, couldn't care less. The same thing with Governor Cuomo, what's going on in New York now, such subtle anti-Semitism we haven't witnessed from government leaders in quite a long time. But when he wanted votes, you could be sure that he went around to everyone in New York, Jewish leaders, asking for their support. So this happens on a steady basis. I'm sure it was even worse during the times of kings, but we see it unfortunately in our times as well. Now, the word Russius is, I said before, there's a very interesting use of the word for kingdom. It really should be that al tizvada, don't be heavy zihirim malchus, with the kingdom. We would have extrapolated that to our governments today, but the Gemara says specifically, the Mishnah says specifically the word Russius. Russius comes from the word rishus, which means permission, which means that, and we see this today also with many, many scandals that occur, that people who are in positions of power feel they have no constraints. Rishus means permission. Permission to do what? To do whatever I feel like doing because I do not have constraints. I'm not going to discuss the different scandals that go on in America today because there are numerous where people feel like they just could do whatever they want. If you're a Republican, you'll think about Democratic excesses. If you're a Democrat, you'll think about Republican excesses. But the truth of the matter is, whichever side of the aisle you're on, whichever party you support, there are plenty of people in government who feel they can just get away with anything because they're in positions of power. Nothing more than that. So that's what the Mishnah tells us. Havizhirim b'rashus. It's homiletically, I've seen it explained, the word rashus means pleasures that are not necessary, meaning havizhirim b'rashus, just changing topic a little bit. It's not talking about government, but havizhirim b'rashus. A human being should be careful in doing things of pleasure to excess. In the beginning of Parshas Kedoshim, the Torah exhorts us, Kedoshim to you. A person should be holy, which Rashi explains that a person should refrain from doing things that are permitted for him to do, which means that, yeah, it's true that a person could eat kosher food, but eating to excess or living to eat, or some people you'll see by shul when there's no COVID and they're having the Kiddush club and they just gobble down that herring and they drink that schnapps like there's no tomorrow. It's kosher. Nobody could accuse them of eating treif, but it's a bit too much. You don't live to eat. You don't live to go to shul. I read recently a little a point which was stated by Victor Miller, who was a great Rav and Darshan, and I remember him well in Flatbush many years ago. He passed away some 10 or 15 years ago. I don't remember, but he said that there are he was talking to girls who are looking for a shidduch, and he said from talking to the boy you could get a lot. From listening to his language you can understand a lot about what he appreciates, what he values. He says, imagine if you are being read a shidduch, somebody suggesting to you a chassidish boy. So chassidish boy tells you, Friday night I went to the Rebbe's tish. Okay, Chassidim do. They go to the tish for the Rebbe, the gathering of Chassidim by the Rebbe's table. And one fellow says, I went to the Rebbe's tish and the divrei Torah, the words of Torah that the Rebbe spoke was exceptional. It just elevated my soul. Okay, that's one perspective. That's a boy you should seriously consider. Another fellow says, I was there and the atmosphere was unbelievable. The singing and the camaraderie was absolutely beautiful. Okay, that's another perspective. And a third fellow says, I went to the Rebbe's tish and the herring was delicious. So, you can listen to what a person says based on, you can understand the person based on what he values, and the Torah is telling you, don't do things to excess. I remember years ago when I was single, my parents came back from a wedding, and I just asked my mom just casually how it was. My mother wanted to teach me a lesson, and she said to me, at this wedding, I saw a woman who was completely dressed from head to toe, and she was completely not tznius, totally immodest, completely immodest. So I wasn't there at the wedding. I don't know. I'm glad I didn't see it. But my mother was trying to bring out a point that technically you could follow the halacha and be completely against the spirit of halacha. And that's what the Mishnah tells you. Havizhirim b'rashus. Be careful with things that are permissible. Not everything that you could do should you do. I know nobody here speaks Yiddish, but there's an expression very similar to that in Yiddish. So I'll leave you with it. I won't bore you with the Yiddish, but not everything that you could do should you do. And you have to be careful also when it comes to getting back to the simple explanation of the Mishnah that Havizhirim b'rashus. I once heard that it means concerning the government. I once heard from Rabbi Brook, one of my Rabbeim. He was the great Navartika Rosh Hashiva. He wants to explain this Mishnah by the government and also in general by people. Havizhirim b'rashus means, and you look at the second part, Shein mikarvin lo la'adam elu la'anasim. They only draw a person. Near and ka'ovin b'shas hanasim. They seem like they're friends when they need something. He says, you see from here that the nature of human beings is to only do favors for people when a person is expecting some reciprocity. But the Torah says, Havizhirim. Be careful with that, says Rabbi Zion, that a person should accustom himself to do um, favors for individuals without any expectation for reciprocity. That same Rabbi Avigdor Miller, who I quoted earlier, wrote somewhere that I read that a person, as part of his or her daily routine, should try and do 10 things for individuals without any expectation of reward, meaning do it and people won't know, right? He said you can even do it for your spouse. You can do a favor for your spouse. Do something for her or for him that the person won't even know that you're doing it. Straighten something up, put something away, um, fold something, do something. If you're in business, discard an unused, um, a used cup of coffee for somebody, and don't tell anybody about it afterwards. Just make sure that you do it. That's what a person should encourage himself to do. As I'm talking to you, I'm reminded of a very well-known philosopher. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. She's not alive any longer. Her name was Ayn Rand. Anybody here heard of Ayn Rand? You heard of her, Adam? Okay. You don't have to read her books. The famous book was called Atlas Shrugged. In a nutshell, she believed that people, of course, she was an atheist, total atheist. She was Jewish, unfortunately. Her real name was something like Leora Rosenberg. I forgot what. She was Russian. And she took the name Ayn Rand for some reason. I don't remember why. Unimportant. But she believed that people should only do things for their own benefit and never should do anything to benefit somebody else. Only do a favor if there'll be reciprocity. Only do something for your own pleasure and for your own excitement, for your own joy. But never do something for anybody else altruistically. It's a very dark world that she lived in. Unfortunately, extremely dark world that she lived in. The Torah tells us exactly the opposite. This is Midas Sodom. That the Sodomites did things for their own good, for their own purposes, never considered doing something for somebody else. Exactly the opposite of what the Torah says. That's what I've been seeing Brooke is saying, that you could learn from this Mishnah what not to do. That people do things, favors for reciprocity, don't be like that. There's another explanation which I saw, which is, Havei Zehir and Barashas. Be careful with the government or the king or the nobility, etc. Which means like this. Everyone learns from everybody else, unfortunately. That's why the Rambam says that Adam Nimshach Achas Fivosav, people are drawn after their surroundings. If you live, the Mishnah tells us also that you have to be careful about your neighbors. If you live in a neighborhood and people do things a certain way, you will very likely be drawn after what is going on in the neighborhood. And if you are not, then your wife and your children or your husband and your kids will be. So you have to be careful with other people's influences, because this happens all the time. Be careful with it. So if you have people in government, very often they act in a very haughty fashion, simply because they have power. When people have power, or if people are wealthy, very often they don't take into account other human beings. They're not in Hebrew you say mityaches. They're not mityaches to others because they have the ability to do it. Why do I do it? Because I can. That's it. I don't take into account the other people. Exactly the opposite of what the Torah teaches us. You have to be careful not to listen to their ways, haughty manners, not caring, not feeling. Now remember, years ago, my brother, who is today is the director of nephrology at Mount Sinai in Brooklyn, had difficulty getting into medical school. Some of it probably had to do with some latent anti-Semitism back in his day. He's a brilliant student, and he made a call. My father, Olav Shalom, called Rabbi Moshe Shera, the very famous head of the Aguda, years ago. And Rabbi Shera called back, and I remember I was there during the conversation. I was not on the phone, but I was standing in the room, and Rabbi Shera agreed happily to help my brother make some calls for him to try and get him into medical school. And my brother eventually did. I don't know if it was through Rabbi Scherer or other ways he got into medical school. He, of course, graduated. But Rabbi Scherer said this. He said, I was impressed. Rabbi Scherer called back pretty much right away. It didn't take him a long time. He called right back. He said that in the Aguda, we like to say that we take care of Kollel Yisrael, all of Kollel Yisrael, and Kol Prat Yisrael, every part of Kollel Yisrael. Meaning that our mission is not just to take care of the society as a whole. Our mission is to take care of each and every individual within society. But there's a person that obviously cared for human beings and didn't act in a very haughty fashion. But unfortunately today, you take a look at some of the politicians that we see in government, their manner of dress, their speech, their deportment, it just turns a person off, how arrogant they are. So if a person has to be among individuals who are involved in government, you have to be careful. Have easy hearing. Be careful and make sure that you are not learning from their ways, because they could be dangerous, very detrimental for yourself and for your children in the future. Okay, having said that, let's move on to the next Mishnah. We'll see the beginning of the next Mishnah. And Hu Haya Omer. This is Mishnah Dalet. This is the same author as the previous two Mishnayos, Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And this is what he said. Asay ritzono kiritzonecha. Make the will of God your will, meaning subjugate yourself to Hashem and make his will your will. What do I want to do? What Hashem does. What Hashem wants to do. Kedei sheya'aseh ritzoncha kiritzono. So that Hashem will make your will his will. Batel ritzoncha mipnei ritzono. Negate your desires in front of Hashem's wishes, so that Hashem will negate the will of others in front of your will. There's a lot to talk about on this Mishnah. Let's start with the beginning of it, which is make your will like, make Hashem's will your will. Make Hashem's will your will, okay? The truth of the matter is that this is really a pasuk in Chumash, and all of you are familiar with this pasuk in Chumash. It says in the Aseres Hadibros, in the Ten Commandments, it says, "Lo sachmod," don't covet, don't be jealous, don't covet somebody else's house, don't covet his wife, just don't covet. Now, all the commentaries ask a question that you can tell a person not to do something. You could say, don't go here, don't go there. You can command the person to do something. Put on tefillin in the morning, go to shul, learn Torah. But how do you command the person what's in a person's heart? Not to covet. If a person sees and he covets, that's a natural response to I want this, I want that. How do you command the person not to covet? And the Turei Even was written by the author of the Shagas Arya. He lived in the 1700s.
Is that not also similar to Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha? How can you force somebody to love another?
Well, that is a different point, because over there I could. That's a good question, Joseph. You see, Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha is a slogan. It's a pasuk in Chumash, I know, but it's a slogan. It's unfortunately used all too often by people who want to corrupt Torah, not to promote Torah. If you look at the Gemara says the halacha of how to apply v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. And the Gemara says in the name of Hillel or in the name of Rabbi Akiva, two different places, it says, Madasani lach al tasa l'chavecha. What you don't like, don't do to somebody else. So the pasuk in Chumash really is just simply a slogan. You have the Torah Shabbal Peh telling you how to apply that pasuk. So what you don't want for yourself, don't do to other people. And that's how I'd be able to interpret V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your fellow as yourself. However, lo sachmod is different. I'm telling you internally, Hashem is saying, do not covet. How do you do that? How do you say internally not to covet? It's like telling a person, don't be hungry. How do you do that? Okay? So the Turei Even writes beautifully. He says that if a person realizes what Hashem wants him to do, and he makes Hashem's will his will, then that is a person won't come to covet, because he's subjugating his will to Hashem's will, and that's what Hashem wants. Hashem wants us not to do it. So therefore, if a person concentrates on the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is what Hashem wants, he will not come to covet. He will not covet. And you find this really, in actuality, you find this in Chumash. There's a pasuk in Chumash at the end of Parshas Kedoshim that says, the second to last pasuk in Kedoshim says, "V'yisem li Kedoshim, and you shall be for me holy, ki Kadosh ani Hashem, because I, Hashem, your God, am holy. V'avdil eschem, and I will separate you min ha'amim, from the nations, lios li, to be for me." So Rashi there brings a statement from our sages. What does that mean? What does that mean? I'll answer that question in a minute, Isaac. Okay, what does it mean I will separate you from the nations? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, "Minayin shlo yomer adam nafshi katze b'basa b'chazir." A person shouldn't say, "I hate pork." Okay, I can't stand the thought of wearing klayim, of wearing shatnez, wool and linen together. No, aval yomer efshi. I could very easily go into my local Wendy's and pick up a cheeseburger and eat it and enjoy it, right? Although I must tell you that, sometimes you walk past like a Burger King and you get the whiff and it actually smells very, very good. But for the life of me, I can't figure out who decided that shrimp is a food. These things look like bugs. Like, who woke up in the morning and said, like, "Oh, I'm going to try and eat this"? I don't understand it. It's disgusting.
A shrimp is somewhat understandable. Imagine the first person that ate a lobster.
A lobster also. A lobster's a walking.
It's like a cockroach of the sea.
It's a cockroach. It's a cockroach in the water. Like, whoever would eat such a thing like that? It's crazy.
Or the fact that they eat the sea urchins that have all this prickly stuff, or they eat the clams or the mussels, or all these things.
I know, but to me, shrimp. I used to have a reef tank for many years. Got wiped out in the hurricane. But I used to have shrimp in my tank, and they eat the garbage, the detritus from the floor. Who eats this stuff? I don't know. Looks like a bug to me. If I was not Jewish, I don't think I could bring myself to eat shrimp. I don't think so. I certainly would be able to eat, hamburgers for sure, non-kosher meat, but I don't see how I would eat shrimp. But that's just an aside.
Yeah, but what do you think the chickens eat? They eat worms.
Yeah, right. But they digest them, and I don't eat their stomachs. I eat their bodies. All animals eat non-kosher things, unless they're complete vegetarians. And even then, a cow is certainly going to be eating, lots of bugs with its grass, for sure. But I'm eating the cow. I don't look at it that way. I'm not saying it's logical, Nisim. I'm not saying. I know that that shrimp is a multi-billion-dollar industry throughout the world, for sure. I'm just saying, for me personally, I couldn't do it, okay? Just because a chicken eats worms, I don't think if I was not Jewish, I could bring myself to eat a worm. Sorry, I just don't think I could do it. Anyway, but the Gemara, Rashi brings a chazal that says a person should think, I definitely could eat treif food. I definitely could wear shatnez, but I don't. You know why? Because Abayoma Efshi, I could. But what can I do? My Father in heaven commanded me not to do it. And that's what it says. That a person, that Hashem is separating us from the nations to be for me. Your separation from the values and from the thoughts and from the actions of the nations of the world is dedicated to me, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's called Lishmi. Pirish min Havera. A person goes away. Pirish min Havera. A person goes away from sin. The Makabel Ol Malchus Shemayim and accepts upon himself the yoke of heaven, so to speak. That's the way a person should be thinking. Isaac asked the question: how is it that you love Hashem? How can a person love Hashem? So that's a very good question. I'll tell you what the answer is. That sometimes love has to grow in a person. Listen to me. If you look at, and soon we're going to have the parsha of Avram and Yitzchak and Chayesara finding Avram trying to find a wife for Yitzchak, and the Torah says that Eliezer went and found Rivka for Yitzchak, and it says at the end, Vayeviyeha ha'ola Sarah Ishto, right? He brought her home. He brought Yitzchak home. Sorry, at the end of Chayesara. He brought Rivka home. Okay, and Yitzchak brought Rivka into the tent of Sarah, his mother. Vayikach is Rivka, and he married Rivka. Vatilo Lishan, she was his wife. Vayehaveha, and he loved her. Now, this is exactly the opposite of the way the world thinks of things. You meet a girl, you love her, then you marry her. That's what people think, right? Okay? It's the other way. The Torah says that you meet a girl, he married her, and then he loved her.
No, not really. Yaakov Avinu wasn't like that.
Listen for a minute. I remember when I got engaged. So, I ended up marrying my wife from California. I got engaged, and I came back from California. I was in cloud 9, and I was in yeshiva, Lakewood Yeshiva at the time, and I was walking to the yeshiva. It was the winter time. I remember it distinctly. And my cousin, Shlomi Weisberg, saw me on the street and he gave me a ride. So he said to me, Mazel tov to you, you got engaged. So I said, yeah, thank you very much, Mazel tov. He says to me, tell me about your kala. So I said, I really love her. So he said to me, no, you don't. I said, what do you mean I don't? I do. He said, no, you don't. He said, you're not in love. You're in like. After you get married, you'll be in love. That's what he said. And he was completely correct, 100% correct. That that's what the Torah tells us, that love is a function of seeing a person's behavior, actions, character, which you can only really know after living with a person in the confines of marriage over the course of a long period of time. And that's what it says over here. That
how do you explain that? Yaakov Avinu's to Rachel.
I will tell you in one moment. So Yitzchak got married, and then he fell in love. So I brought this out simply to tell you that a person's characteristics cause a person to be beloved by somebody else. And the same thing to answer Isaac's question by love of Hashem. When a person opens up his mind and sees the greatness of Hashem and the chesed that Hashem does for human beings, then a person learns to love Hashem. I didn't forget you, Nisan. In the introduction to his siddur, Rav Yaakov Emden writes in a famous siddur called the Siddur of the Yavitz, Yaakov Emden Ben Tzvi. He writes that he writes that the miracle of Jewish survival is greater than the miracle of splitting the sea or any other miracle that Hashem did for us. Because if you think about it, you see how many pure anti-Semites there are in the world. Today they cloak themselves into anti-Israel. They change the discourse of conversation, and all the cruelties that they perpetuate on people, they put onto us, and they make us be the bad ones. And yet Hashem preserves us. And anyone who thinks that he preserves us because of the might of the Israeli army or the fact that many of us have guns in our houses is silly. Hashem preserves us. He gives the Israeli army might to be able to defend itself. He gives us the ability to be able to defend ourselves. And to have a certain chen in the eyes of the government. It all comes from Hashem. Nothing comes without Hashem's will. So when you look at that and you see that and you see the ability of Hashem to give us the Hashem's giving us the ability to be able to grow and become better, you learn to love Hashem. Now, we're going to stop here and we'll continue on this next week, but I will answer Nisam's question. Nisam asked the question, you find that by Yaakov Avinu, Yaakov, the first time he sees Rachel, gives her a kiss, right? And, excuse me, he already knew that this girl is designated to be his wife. What do you mean? First of all, you have to recognize, it doesn't say over there that he loved her, but it's not the point. The point is that Yaakov knew with his divine inspiration that this was the girl that was dedicated for him. This is it. It says later on, it says that Yaakov loved Rachel. It's true, even before he got married, but it's because he recognized right away and immediately that this was the girl that was designated for him. He knew that. So once he knew that this was the girl that was dedicated for him, he understood that she has the characteristics that he will like. And when he saw her actions, he came to love her, even though he hadn't lived with her yet. But he noticed and he saw the actions that Hashem, the kind of behavior that Hashem was giving him, the kind of behavior in a woman Hashem was giving him for a wife. So he learned to love Rachel. But also, it didn't happen immediately. It took a while. Okay, we'll stop here, and Hashem will continue next week. It's good to have everybody back. Big question?
Back.
I'm happy to